Thank you. So firstly, thank you, Panvala, for putting this event together. I am really excited to be on this panel with the people that are sitting here next to me. I know most of you, and we kind of chat somewhat regularly. And I think each individual person that's here has a unique perspective on inclusion and the work that they contribute to each of their projects. So maybe to get started, we can go around and introduce ourselves and the work that we do, and then we can just get started on the accessibility of Web3. So I guess I'll start with Calderon, core contributor at Orange Protocols. We are building a reputation layer protocol where you are able to take your reputation based on your Web3 activity and be able to leverage that across DeFi protocols, NFT marketplaces, DAOs, etc. So fun stuff. The oranges that are on the table, check them out. It's a QR code.
Hey everyone, Isla from For the Win DAO. We are a venture capital focused DAO on the inclusivity topic, working on how do we make venture capital as a space more accessible to people from diverse backgrounds. And yeah, also just increasing the investment going into diverse founders. But yeah, more to come soon.
Everyone, my name is Raghavi. I was previously at PlankStyle for about 8 months. PlankStyle is a social DAO, media. We build software products, education tools, a lot of activity there. Currently an editor at XHQ, and I'm doing research and research on like DAO governance and organizations. So yeah, glad to be here.
Hi, my name is Anjali Young. I sound super stiff. I'm co-founder and CCO of Abridge. We're the makers of Collabland. Collabland services about over 20,000 crypto communities on Discord and Telegram, and about 3.4 million connected wallets. Yeah, and we have a lot of plans, so I'm excited to talk today about inclusion and accessible onboarding.
Hi everybody, my name is Skylar Van Sickle. I'm with artfam.global. We're working with artists, helping give them technology to bridge them into a more digital space, mostly in the NFT space, and also working with larger brands to incorporate a brand storyline that allows artists and to come in with VR as well as NFTs to really continue a storyline into the future for bigger brands.
All right, so I think those introductions hopefully show the diverse perspective of different projects that people are working on. And so with that, I think what I'd like to start with is the beautiful description that was in the description for this event, because I think that we can kind of start with that to facilitate the conversation. And so today we're talking about how we can create these accessible on-ramps into Web3 for the next billion people to join us, use and monetize the ecosystem. And then it goes on to say that currently it can take several months before a person feels like they can contribute in a meaningful way, know how to navigate through different DAOs, and familiarize themselves with the platforms they use. So I think one thing that I'd like to key in on is that next billion users. So the next billion users don't look like us, don't sound like us. So how do we create ways for those people to find a home in Web3? So we'll get started this way, and if anybody wants to jump the line, just raise your hand.
Yeah, so I'm based in Switzerland. I come at it from a perspective of thinking about problems in terms of the whole world. I think there's definitely a tendency for us to think in terms of the developed world, of countries that we come from, and how things are there. So definitely thinking about how DAOs actually provide different languages, different approaches, and just the diversity in general. I think so having the diversity in your culture allows you to think about already what are the different problems that people are going to be facing. So that would be my initial input.
Yeah, I think so. I'm a big proponent of DAOs as a way of onboarding people into crypto Web3. I think like education is fantastic, right? Learning about crypto, dabbling with different DeFi protocols, buying NFTs, but all of that requires some upfront capital, right? And a lot of people that is prohibited prohibitory for many people around the world. And so I think with DAOs, the only cost to contribute to a DAO is time, say mental and maybe emotional energy. But the problem is that DAOs are very noisy, right? If you've ever like entered a Discord with like more than maybe 100 people contributing on a regular basis, it's just absolute chaos. And one of the things I hear from a lot of people is like, how do I get started? How do I contribute? I want to contribute, I want to join, but I have like absolutely zero context. And I've been thinking about that problem, and I think like what inevitably happens is the people that do have the context, the people that are sufficiently like informed to help build those onboarding ramps, or they have to be passionate about onboarding people into their DAO. And the problem space for DAOs is just so large and so fascinating that a lot of people that have that context, like the people that have been there for a while, the people that are plugged into what's happening, are interested in working on other problems and not interested in onboarding. Which is fine, right? I mean, you should do what you want to do. That's kind of the advantage of having such a low cost way of contributing to the Web3 space. But that ends up creating this this gap between people that want to join and people that have the sufficient information and capacity to contribute. So I was thinking about this the other day, and I think there are two things that DAOs really need to hone in on in terms of like onboarding people into Web3. One is, again, like I said, like having a clear onboarding process. I think the next two does a fantastic job of this. They have the weekly meetings, they have the human connection. With DAO, it's like you just get a few messages that kind of gives you some baseline understanding of our mission and values, organization design, and tools that we use, and then you just kind of get down to the deep end. So I think like having a more sort of soft handoff approach is like a way to help people gain that context, connect people to the right people, and really have a more like human connection. The other is having a clear path towards contribution. I think, like, again, Index does a fantastic job of this. I think Word does a good job of this as well. They have these very clear pathways of how can I start as a baseline contributor and work my way up, right? What is my, like, what is effectively the career pathway for me as a contributor within a DAO? And not a lot of DAOs have that because it's difficult. It's difficult to have conversations about compensation. It's difficult to sort of create that structure. Some DAOs are small, don't have that capital deployed yet. Some DAOs just don't have the scale in which it makes sense to have those conversations. But one of the things I say is, like, if you're looking to contribute to a DAO, like, one, make sure they have a clear onboarding process, and two, make sure they have some type of contributor pipeline so you know what the future at that organization for you may look like. So that's just like off the cuff. I mean, there's a lot more things I can say on this. But I won't talk about it.
Awesome. Yeah, Panvala, we think a lot about this. And one of the things we notice is, like I mentioned, we have about over 20,000 communities that Panvala monitors right now, crypto communities. And in these communities, maybe 25% of the people even have their wallet connected and have a token. And so how do we get this whole other group of people that are lurking in these communities to get to a token? And what we've seen is that once people have their first crypto asset, that's what gets them excited about learning more. Like, until you have your first crypto asset, until you have your first wallet, you're not in it. And so you don't really have that same initiative, drive, motivation, impetus, whatever you want to use, in order to learn and be more, educate yourself further. And so that's kind of the problem that we're thinking about now, is that what do we do about onboarding these people who are not yet tokenized, but are still in these tokenized communities? Now, the two ways that we're dealing with that. One is that we're going to be creating a wallet for them and doing this tipping token where now they will have their first they'll have a crypto asset without even having to purchase anything themselves and own anything themselves. And then it's going to be a custodial solution. Well, it's going to be a multi-sig right now where Collabland will be a signer. But once they have enough assets in that wallet and they're ready to move on to the next level, they can create their own wallet where now Collabland isn't a signatory anymore. That's the first kind of step, is like now they're going to have a wallet and now this is going to be the motivation to learn more. Second is being a part of these Web2 institutions. So right now we're on Discord and Telegram. We're going to be moving to Reddit soon. Go where the people are. Adding a crypto layer to these Web2 establishments is going to be a way to reach these people. They don't have to come to a native Web3 platform. Meet them where they are, add a crypto layer to what they're already doing, and just make crypto one additional part of the way they already are engaging online. Now, the main thing you have to think about when you think about onboarding and inclusivity is, along with mass onboarding, like 1 billion people, there's a huge scam vector. There's so many, like with Collablands, we see how new people come in and they're taken advantage of right away. And that happens because a fire hose of interest and a super high learning curve. This is like the beginning of the internet all over again. Right now, we're still kind of in the place where people don't even want to put their credit card on. And that's kind of where we are with crypto right now. And so along with the onboarding of 1 billion people, you have to think about the fact that there's neurodivergence, there's people with access to different levels of communication, different languages, different education, different assets, you know, their laptop or their phone, what do they have, what are they using? And so it's not, that's what you have to kind of think about when you think about this next group of people, is how do we keep them safe? And how do we make it easy? And understanding that until they have some skin in the game, and by skin in the game right now, I mean crypto, an asset, until they have that, they're not going to be interested in educating themselves.
Yes. I guess where I would start is to Frog's point. I mean, not only is that space noisy, but the whole broad Web3 space is noisy, right? And to your point, how do we actually like penetrate that noise to where the onboarding process is successful? What we really do when we're working with big brands is help them develop a storyline, because we find that a storyline is the best way to keep anybody engaged, right? And what we see in the DAO space is storylines are formed and they're collectively, told. And so that's a really great way of creating community and keeping people engaged. Now, whether it's Web 2 or Web 3, we see like this basic engagement or this basic onboarding into communities happening all the time. So again, to your point, like I'm always asking the question: do we need Web 3 for this specific use case, right? Because some brands we're working with. Their customers, their community members are, there's a pushback because they don't understand where their community is going, and they want to be a part of that, right? And so we're working with these brands to help develop that storyline that keeps their customers engaged, right, and helps onboard them through that engagement into the Web3, right? That's how we're approaching this accessibility.
So there was a few things I think that everyone touched on here, but the one thing that I want to explore a little bit further that I think most of us here touched on was that onboarding experience, right? So it's interesting, I think, that once you reach a level of participation in the space, we kind of forget how we got started, right? Some of the challenges that we were met with, just trying to learn how to use a non-custodial wallet, right? Like, how do you determine what are good assets, right? What type of communities do I want to join? Like, should I be joining 80, 100 DAOs to figure that out? Or are there better ways to kind of surface these communities and connect with them? So to the point of onboarding, I think it was you, Angelique, who mentioned the wallets and crypto assets as a onboarding tool. I wonder if we can explore that a little bit in terms of how difficult it is to learn how to use these wallets, right, and protect them, because yeah, there's a ton of scammers out there. So how can we do better to make Web3 more accessible for those of us who are just getting started? So Angela, do you want to start there?
Yeah, so right now, as you probably know, the most popular thing in crypto right now is NFTs. They're taking off like crazy. Everybody's super into them. What does it take to purchase an NFT? If you think about it, like the most popular NFTs are on ETH. So you're going to have like a Coinbase. You start with a Coinbase account where you move your money from USD into ETH, and now you move from ETH and you move to MetaMask. And so now you're kind of on your own. Now you're going to OpenSea, you're buying an NFT with what's in your MetaMask. And now with the MetaMask, you have your seed phrase and you have your password, and now all of your assets are in this wallet. Well, and people don't really understand the safety that it takes to hold on to your seed phrase. You know, like my Twitter bio says like, never share your seed phrase. My pinned message is like, GM, never share your seed phrase. I run the Collabland Twitter. Now our Twitter banner says like, welcome to Web3, never share your seed phrase, because people send us their seed phrase in a support question. Like they will say like, help, I'm having trouble attaching my wallet. Here's my wallet, here's my seed phrase. Can you help me? And then we have to tell them like, no, and burn that wallet and you can never use it again. Like we have to guide them in that way because they just don't know. And that's really where we've gone in terms of this new plan about doing this multi-sig wallet and wallet creation for the new people that join Collabland servers. They don't even have to own any asset or verify with Collabland. If you join a server that has the Collabland bot installed, then a wallet has been created for you with your Discord ID and with Collabland as a signatory. The reason we're doing that is that if you join a community, let's say you post a tweet about that community, you don't even own the asset. I'm just going to make one up, furry sunglasses. Now I've joined this furry sunglasses community and I posted a tweet about how much fun this community is on Twitter. I'm like, I'm not even a holder, but this group is the bomb. Every Friday night, they do this mental health night meditation. And on Saturdays, they do a trivia night. And on Sunday night, they have a movie night. And they all get to, it's like I'm saying this on Twitter, and then 25 new people join, 30 new people buy the NFT, and it's because of my Twitter engagement. Well, I may not own the asset, but now everybody else in that community can give me some tokens. And they can reward me for what I've done in that community. And so now I'm like, oh, great, I have this wallet, a Gnosis wallet. Collabland is one of the signatories, and I'm a signatory. Well, now I've collected up to a certain amount of tokens. Okay, now I have these assets. I'm ready to move on. Now, during this time, this ramp-up time where you're collecting crypto assets, but you don't have 100% ownership yet, you're learning, you're in the community, you're engaging. You know, part of the reason we're adding this type of economy to communities is because we're seeing it. A community starts and then it matures. You know, like, I've been in this great position of being CCO of communities, you know, for Collabland, to see communities grow from like our very first communities, which were all complete DAOs. I think Bangless was one of the first ones, FWB was one of the first ones, even prior to Bored Ape, you know, before NFTs even came and revolutionized and took over communities to what we see now. But I've been able to watch their growth, and I know that having a tipping element, you know, we have 70 communities on tipping right now, and we've kind of watched them like an experiment in a fish tank. And having this tokenized element allows communities to become richer, make those relationships stronger. And so how can we do that? How can we include people who are brand new to crypto and have them be a part of that ecosystem to start? And that's one of our strategies.
So you bring up something, I think, in that is interesting, in that Collabland has this like deep connection with communities very early, but as they're getting built. There's also something that was said earlier in terms of like the token of a community to be able to join that community. You know, one of the things that my colleague and I talk about regularly is like, what makes a community? Like, what is a community? Like, at what point do you join, interact, participate in governance? Is a token necessary, or is it just being a member and showing up and contributing and being able to like earn your way in, right? Through that participation, through that activity, through that reputation. And so I'm curious if we can talk about that in terms of like community activism, participation, and how we can surface that within the communities that we are a part of, so that we can make a distinction between the token element of it and the contribution and the membership element of it. So I'm looking at you, but anyone else that wants to take this, please do. We can get started with you, and then we'll go to you.
Yeah, so I have a few thoughts on this. One, just coming back to what Anjali was saying before about trust and that onboarding at the very beginning. And I always have a friend of mine in mind when I think about DAOs, who is from Argentina. He's never had a bank account before. And he has gotten used to, at every stage of his life, every institution and every person is trying to rip him or his family off. So his attitude to trust and new organizations that are promising a better future is very little trust. And I onboarded him to Panvala DAO. And I really think that this point of giving something away for involvement versus expecting payment at the beginning is super, super important to build up trust. But for the Winnick perspective, we are looking at how do we bring people into venture capital. And one of the things that we see is that on top of bringing people in because they have money and want to contribute their money, we need to find ways to bring them in because they have talent and allow them to build up a stake in what we're doing based on what they're able to contribute as a person and as a talent. So we've come up with a VC talent program where they can contribute their time over 6 months, and they earn essentially tokens in exchange for their time, and we don't expect any money from them. So that's how we're kind of taking things.
Yeah, I think you asked a great question. Well, I was talking to something next about this earlier. I think in terms of, or a few things here. So I saw a tweet earlier today from Brian Flynn, the co-founder of Rabbit Hole, and he said there's a difference between community ownership and contributor ownership. Right? Community ownership is you have a token, you are exposed to the upside of the success of the project, you get to participate in governance. Contributor ownership is you have influence over the future of the protocol of the project based on your contributions up until that point. Now, the way that's done currently is, or at least at Panvala, in a lot of different places, is you get paid in tokens for your contribution. But if you're a core contributor, right, if your livelihood depends on the time that you're putting in the DAO, you are liquidating those tokens so that you can pay your bills. Versus, say, a part-time contributor that has a job somewhere else and is able to accrue those tokens without needing to sell them. And so what that creates is a power imbalance where this part-time contributor who has less context, who has less information, who is less plugged in, is accruing voting governance power in his or her wallet, whereas a core contributor who has the most amount of context possible is offloading or liquidating their tokens and basically losing their governance power. And so I think there's a strong case to be made that instead of having a sort of purely token-weighted governance model, you have a reputation-based model, right? Where your contributions affect your ability to vote within an organization. Now, I think the problem there is that there's some issue with civil resistance, right? How can you tell who is civil resistance in the sense that how do you make sure that you're not splitting your contributions over a group of different different accounts and influencing the vote that way? And the other problem is it's very difficult to also define how reputation gets accrued, right? We have coordinate, we have source credit, you can use some sort of personal attestation, but there's no sort of set formula that makes the most sense, right? And in fact, what I noticed is that the sort of core contributors that participate heavily in the DAO are very cross-functional. And so their value actually doesn't get captured because the stuff that they're doing is very top level, right? Whereas if you're working deeply within a project or a specific work stream, your roles and responsibilities are quite defined. And so if you're using things like SourceCred or Coordinate or like on-chain payments as a way of attesting to that person's reputation, the people that are actually sort of involved in like meta governance and meta strategy are not captured in that that reputation system. And so I think like I would personally like to see DAOs move towards a reputation-based governing model where their contributors are heavily their contributors are able to influence the vision of a project or a protocol instead of whales or just individual token holders. I think whales and token holders do have a place, but I don't really know what that like mental model is like yet. Yeah.
Anybody else wants to take it?
Sure. So I think the question was what is community, what is proper contribution?
Yeah, the role of tokens versus reputation
Sure.
in the community.
Sure. I'll just take it back to like what is community? For us, it's a storyline where the members are following a narrative, right? And so like how do you contribute to that? Well, it depends on what's the narrative that's being told, right? Like there's a lot of NFT communities out there. What's the narrative that Bored Ape, what's the narrative they're telling them? So celebritization, money, like what's the narrative, right? What keeps people engaged, right? Look at Wall Street Bets, right? There's another community, right? What's keeping them engaged, right? Like what's keeping your community engaged? What do you want to keep your community engaged? And how do you want to reward that engagement with based on the narrative and storyline that you're putting out, right? So that's our take.
So I think we should probably explore the fairness and inclusivity of reputation versus tokens. I agree with what you said, Frog Monkey, that there's a place for token holders, right? I think that they've taken a risk, right, by either buying or holding tokens. So there's definitely room for them to be a part of governance. And I guess maybe we can talk about reputation both from a fairness, where it's open to anyone to earn that reputation, where it might not be so easy to buy a certain number of tokens, right? So maybe we can start exploring it from that perspective. And Anjali, did you want to get started?
Yeah, I mean, as far as reputation is concerned, that's a huge part of what we're talking about now with Collabland moving forward, is not only do we have access to what token somebody is holding, but we also have access to what roles they're holding, and they're like the data exhaust of their contribution in each of these communities. So now what do we do with that information? It's not something that we thought about when we first started. It was like, oh, token creating is great. This is a minimally viable DAO. That's what we're creating here. And now we're sitting on all of this data for each individual member, and it's, okay, now what do we do moving forward? How can we democratize this moving forward? Not being the holders of this data ourselves to monetize and to keep, but allowing each person, each individual to say, yes, this is my history of how I've behaved in these communities so far. And so it's almost like you don't even have to hold the token anymore, right? Like if you held a token at the beginning of a project, you were an early believer, and then maybe when they got to a certain level of success, you're like, okay, I'm good now. I'm gonna sell out of that project and find another project. And that's your reputation that you're building, which is, I'm someone who can spot quality projects early. So look at me. These are not in my wallet now, but Collabland can verify and attest to the fact that I held these roles at this time. And you can see with the calendar of when these projects started of who I am and what I've done. And so it's almost like a whole new type of verification or attestation that Collabland can do rather than just holding your token. And so from our perspective, it's how can we get this into the hands of the individual person? How can we give autonomy and sovereignty back to that person so that no longer is there a gatekeeper to verify and validate who they are and what they were, but they can just show their Collabland verification. So verification or verified credentials is where we're moving in that direction.
take a shot.
Oh.
So the question about tokens, right? And giving them to your members, again. For us, we spend a lot of time working on the narrative, okay? Because a token can just be a token, or it can actually represent something, right? It's like a token is a digital something, and you have a skin around it. That can be your avatar, that can be a PFP, that can be whatever you want it, like the token to actually represent within your community, right? So, in that sense, what we start seeing is we have members of the community starting to self-identify with what they want their token to represent, right? I mean, the best example I can give you is animals, right? If your community has a narrative about animals, what kind of animal do you want to be in that community, and what does that animal represent in that community? And then if this person's like, I want to be the lion because it represents this, right? Well, now you get the other members to vote. Does this person best represent that thing, that archetype, if you want, within our narrative, within our storyline? Is that the person we want to represent us in this way, right? So, yeah.
So another thing in terms of where reputation, I think, can play into how anyone can earn that in a DAO, and certainly open up opportunities for them in the governance of that DAO, is the ability to reward individuals where, based on their contributions, regular activity, participating in the governance of that protocol or community, they're able to get an additional weight to the way that they can be a part of that governance of that project. So I guess what I'm leading into is token governance broken? When individuals come in and hold a large amount of tokens and don't vote, is there an opportunity for people who are coming in that are big fans of the community and the project and are giving it their all? Is there a way to surface that, and so that those people, regardless of their token holdings, can become, in a way, stewards of the project based on that contribution and participation? Or is there something else that's left to be explored? And again, looking at this from the angle of the people that are coming in to make the project, the community, and the governance of it inclusive to everyone. Anybody want to speak to that?
Can you repeat the question just one more time?
Sure. So I guess just to ask the question, it's more so about how can we open up and be more inclusive in terms of how we activate people in governance within a project or community? And is that reputation a way to allow them to become stewards of the project based on that activity and impact in that community?
After you.
I'm happy to go too.
I'll keep it short this time. So I think, even before answering your question about, how does that reputation sort of connect with governance, I think the first thing I want to talk about is why does governance matter, right? Why is it important to be involved in governance as part of the community? The cool thing about DAOs and Web3 as a whole is you have these theoretically flat organizations in which you get to shape the future of that, right? That is the value of participating in governance, is that it is your contribution, it is your signal as a peer within a network of a larger set of peers, all sort of moving the ball forward together. Participating in governance is probably the easiest way to be a part of that community-driven mission, right? Whereas, again, companies, it's you don't really have a say in what the CEO does, right? You can maybe talk to him if you know him or whatever, but you don't have the ability to be a part of this democratic movement, which undergirds a lot of the governance activity for Web3 protocols and projects. So that's why it's important to participate in governance. It's a way to buy in, it's a way to be a part of something bigger, right, and not just be a cog in the wheel, which I think is like a lot of the sentiment in working in the Web 2 world, right? You hear about like the Great Resignation, and a lot of that is because there's like a major disconnect between people that are providing their labor and how that labor is actually getting used, right? There's not to get like super Marxist on you guys, but there's this discrepancy between like labor and how that labor gets utilized, right? But in DAOs, you get to participate in the decision-making process of how your labor gets used, and so that's why it's important. So specifically about reputation, I think like reputation should be like a multiplier, right? I think like there's no need to sort of throw the baby out with bathwater. I think tokens are like a great way, right? I don't think token voting is broken. I think it's imperfect. In the same way that like direct democracy is imperfect, but it works in some cases. And I think like we're trying to figure out what are the different governance mechanisms that we use, right? Liquid democracy, representative democracy, holographic consensus, basic consensus, quadratic voting, right? These are all like modifications of token-weighted voting that I think we can experiment with. But in terms of like how do you prevent whales, or how do you prevent not prevent, but how do you minimize the impact that whales have? How do you minimize the impact that people on the periphery that don't have a lot of context have over the organization? I think like reputation could basically just be a multiplier, right? Whether it's like an NFT that multiplies your token-weighted voting, or there's some like smart contract voting that can definitely be done. But I think like that's kind of my take. Is like I think token-weighted voting is fine. I think there's a lot of experimentation to be done in terms of what the right token voting mechanisms are, depending on the situation, the decision that's being made, the proposal that's being voted on. And I think the reputation should be a multiplier for that.
I thought a lot about this too, and from just my experience of being in DAOs, like apathy is such a huge problem. Like, and I know myself, I feel DAO fatigue just being in the DAOs that I am and having to vote and staying on top of it. And I thought, like, how are we going to extend this forward? Like, how do we incentivize participation, number one, and try to protect the people that are the ones that are interested? And it's kind of two things. One is like, you have to find a way to make it fun. I don't know what the unlock there, but there has to be a way to make it fun. And two, there should be some way to delegate. I think about like, if there's somebody, I like the way Humpty's voting, and I like how he's participating in the community, and I see that he's getting a lot of rewards or praise or tokens or whatever. And I think, what, for this season or this semester or this quarter, I'm going to delegate my votes to Humpty. And then I watch him, maybe by the end of the quarter, I say like, how has he voted? And am I going to keep my vote with him, or am I going to switch it to somebody else? And so I think we need something like that, some kind of delegation process, and that can be attached to reputation. And maybe somebody who isn't a whale but has the most reputation points by participating in the community, then I can delegate to them. So that's kind of what I think about, and how to deal with the apathy, the voter apathy, especially when it comes to people who are in multiple projects.
So for us, we tend to look at the utility of the NFT or the token. Like, what is the utility providing for the brand or for the community? Is it a speculative? Like, is there a speculative like utility to it? Is there a pure like incentive utility, or like what's the utility behind that? And then extracting from that, like, okay, what level of governance should we actually put here, right? And what does that governance look like? As in, if there is a speculative utility to the token, well, we have to keep in mind that we're going to have those, call them silent investors, right? Like backing our community, right? Whereas maybe there's a set of tokens that is more governance based, right? There's nothing to say that when we have one set of tokens, right? So really, again, we just keep bringing it back to the narrative every single time. How can we construct the actual mechanisms from the actual narrative? And then what is that? And
So I would just slightly change tack on that topic a little bit. Coming back to the reputation topic, I think it's worth acknowledging. So I really like what you said for Monkey. I don't think tokens are broken. I think maybe we just need to think
about how we're allocating them. But I do think a lot about how reputation is based on how people's contributions are perceived by people who are in the DAO, and how most DAOs are largely North American, European, would be, I would say, 80% contributors in most DAOs. And I do notice sometimes contributors coming in from India or South America where the English is not that great, but it seems that they have something really valuable to contribute, but we don't necessarily know how to help them contribute, or we don't perceive their values so strongly because we're not able to communicate with them as easily as we are with people who are from our own culture or from our own language. And so I don't really know what the answer is, but I think it's just something that we need to think about really carefully. How are we actually making it fair in the way that value is attributed to people and reputation is attributed to people? And that's also something that Humpty and I are working on at Backlist DAO. We've been working on the diversity topic where we're trying to think about these problems, like how are we including people from different cultures, neurodivergent backgrounds, genders, everything. But it's a huge problem, and I think one of the issues that I see is that it's really hard to find the data to be able to actually look at how biased are we, because it's not that easy to say, okay, this person in the DAO is definitely a woman, or this person in the DAO is definitely, African American. I would love to have more data where we can do like regression analysis and say like, actually it's pretty clear that we're making some biased decisions here, but we don't really have that yet. And especially with the blockchain being so anonymous and many people not wanting to give that data, I think it's going to be a difficult task to work on, but I would really like to see more work being done there.
Yeah, thank you so much for bringing us back around here, because I think we started the conversation in terms of, what are communities, how can people join these communities, and then as they go deeper down that rabbit hole, how can we be inclusive of these people without necessarily being so specific about token allocations, right? And so coming back around, I think, thank you so much, in terms of bringing up the global community that we're serving, right? The cultural differences from these communities and maybe the bias in our communities based on who we are, right? Where these DAOs started. So maybe we can talk a little bit about the ability or some of the challenges there, and maybe some of the ideas that you personally come up with or through your own communities discuss as how we can be better at onboarding people from around the world that are culturally different from us. Who wants to take this one?
Well, I can speak from the perspective of NFT communities. Art itself is international appeal. Like, that's one of the things that I got the most excited about with the NFT movement, is that now we're in community with people from all over the world, and we're bonded together by art, one, but two, this financial asset. It's like, what does that do? Having this language that we all share together, which is this crypto asset, which is this financial asset. It's global money, it's international money. Someone that owns that same asset as I do, that lives in Mexico City or lives in Vietnam, like, all of a sudden we're in a community together and we share something, which on the surface looks like just a financial asset, but can grow into so much more because of these communities. And so they have become, they're really a beautiful place. There are language barriers, of course, there are channels for all different languages. And it's not, speaking English, of course, you still need to speak English. I don't know how we're going to change that. English is still the language of crypto. However, the space itself, like what we're building, these communities, these intersections of culture and language and countries, I mean, it's happening already. I will say that. It's happening already. Like, yes, there's English, and that's just going to be the barrier for now, and we just all have to accept it unless something changes. But the fact that we're all sharing money we're all sharing ETH, or we're all sharing Solana, or whatever. It's like, that's a thing. That's a global glue that we've never had before. And so the relationships that are growing from that connection, and when we say financial asset, what is that? It's everything. It's how we feel about ourselves. It's about how we feel about how we can take care of our families. It's how we move in the world knowing we have this much money or that much money. It's completely core to who we are. And so saying that you're connected by a financial asset, it may sound cold, but it's not cold. It's everything. It is our community.
I think the best way I can articulate this is through a story. I have a friend and developer in Egypt, and he's very disincentivized from learning and working in Egypt because of the taxes that the government takes, and the system is not the best. But what crypto allows me to do is buy him a cup of coffee without him having to worry about all that.
Continue.
I think one of the clearest examples of this is time zone differences. So we have, Vegas has a bunch of contributors all over the world. I think we did a survey at one point, it was like 60% US, 40% not. I don't know if that, yeah, this is a count for Europe, but anyway, fairly low. Because, and that's also because, like I was saying, the barrier to entry is so low, right? You don't need to, there's no like financial costs, there's no like legal, contract signing to join a DAO, but so I think in some sense, like maybe you're advocating a little bit in that you have this fairly inclusive way to contribute, but then you start to run into problems around cultural differences, language barriers, kinds of differences, and one of the problems that we run into is like there are people in China, Singapore, India that like are not able to attend a lot of meetings that we hold, right? And the answer to that is like tough luck, right? Like we got to make decisions, and we got to have these meetings, and it sucks that you can't make it. Maybe you can read the meeting notes, right? Yeah, who reads the meetings? And so I think like just in terms of management practices, right? The way that we organize teams, the way that we project manage, the way that we collectively make decisions, I think just need to be more asynchronous, right? I think that is one way of creating more avenues and more space for people to contribute, regardless of where they are in the world, what their cultural backgrounds are. I think I'd say like the lab is probably one of the most advanced organizations that practices asynchronously. All of their documentation is public. We're really good about that. But that model of operation is not something that we're used to, right? We're used to having meetings, and it takes it takes someone from that world of like asynchronous organization to help sort of like guide the way, right? And it's I don't know, it's a tough problem. That's just one example. Like we're not even talking about cultural differences. We're not talking about values. We're not talking. Another example is like Vegas DAO's translation bit, right? And we try to, and they're making this like massive effort to like make sure we translate all of our media properties, because that's one way to propagate Web3 and the values to the rest of the world. But like those of us that are sort of based in the US and in Western nations, English-speaking nations, like it doesn't come to mind. It's not like, hey, let's allocate budget so that we can take this project and bring the translator skill into into the scope of work and propagate that outwards. That's not the first reaction. The first reaction is like, let's just do what we're going to do. And if someone from the translator guild like comes in and says like, hey, have you guys thought about allocating budget to translate this newsletter in like, Japanese? Then we're like, yeah, I guess we could do that, right? And so it's a cultural thing too. It's like we have to take the time and effort to actually go and try to be more inclusive. It's not. I don't think it's something that you can like just. This isn't code, right? This is human. This is human coordination. This is evolving. So I don't know. I'm just hopeful. I'm optimistic, but I think it's a problem.
Yeah, fully on board. I think it's hard work, but it's worth doing. Being my point.
So maybe we can discuss one last pitch here, and that is, in the next 5 years, as the previous panel closed with, how are we making the transition from Web 2 to Web 3 easier, more accessible for the next billion users that we claim we're going to bring into this ecosystem?
Yeah.
I got to bounce in 5 minutes.
Yeah,
so
do
I think it's I think there's a lot of ways to answer that question. I think one is the tooling, right? The UX needs to improve quite a bit. Don't burn me at the stake for this, but we have this ethos of not your keys, not your crypto. Need to have non-custodial wallets. But honestly, if a custodial wallet gets you into Web3, go and use custodial wallet, right? If you need to put your money in Coinbase and that's the way that you get to interact with DeFi and with Coinbase's NFT marketplace, go ahead and do that. I'm not gonna I'm not gonna gatekeep you from accessing the beautiful world of Web3 because you're not using it the way that I'm using it, right? That's yes. And so I think we part of it is we need to design tools that are more inclusive of the way that people actually use products and not how we want them to use it, but adapt to their needs. Because we're the early adopters, right? If you look at that sort of tech adoption lifecycle, the people that are the early majority, late majority, the way that they use products is not the way that we're going to use products. So in terms of designing stuff that way. I think gas fees are prohibitively expensive, right? I'm a bit of a heat maxi, but if you guys are if you're gonna be on Solana, if you're gonna be on FX, if you're gonna be on that's your way of getting involved in crypto, go ahead and do that. I really hope that L2s take off because I think there's greater security benefits to L2s over L1s. But again, I'm not gonna gatekeep you from participating in the crypto ecosystem because you're not using the way I'm using it. And then just DAOs and more structured, man. Come on. When I talked about onboarding, we talked about compensation. I just think we're still such in the early innings of DAOs, and given that participating in DAOs is so low cost of entry, I think that's a great place for people to participate and really find your niche, whether it's venture capital, whether it's media, whether it's art, NFTs. And so creating more structure for those places to be better, more efficient, more effective. But also be more friendly to these people. So anyway, I have to go. Thank you guys so much. I appreciate your time.
And this might sound a little woo-woo, but patience, compassion, right? Really understanding, like Fog was saying, what are their needs over ours. Just making the process smoother, maybe being okay with changing the language a little bit so that because people know not to share a password, right? So why not call it a password, right? Just a few things that might help, but we'll see.
Yeah, I came from the TradFi world, and we spent quite a lot of time and effort thinking about how to make the TradFi world more accessible to non-traditional investors. And then hopped into DeFi, where we're now inventing a whole new bunch of jargon that we now have to start reworking for people to understand. So second that point. Second also for Keith's point on user experience. I think in all things, user experience is key. And at the moment, this is really, really tough. And the more that we work on this, the better it's going to be. I can just speak from personal experience. I've been working with some family office investors, for example, who are highly educated, highly Web2 savvy, and I've worked with them. I've worked with them for months, educating them in one thing and the other, and then still end up with a call at 7 p.m. in the evening along the lines of, how do I buy this NFT? I've already showed them this, and they're still struggling. And that just tells me the user experience is so far from what it needs to be. So, yeah.
All right. Well, thank you everyone for joining us. It's been a pleasure to speak to everyone on the panel, and hopefully you learned something from this and you chat with us afterwards.
We've also shared out, each of their handles, so you can follow them directly regarding today. But thank you so much for our panelists. Next panel coming up is on the accessibility of web.